Hello everyone and welcome. The Vampire Armand is one of the most interesting yet complicated characters from the Vampire Chronicles. From reading the Vampire Lestat and Interview with the Vampire, he really stood out as someone with a story that was needed to be told, and fortunately for me, his story was already written when I first started reading the Chronicles. But if you're someone who bought Interview back when it first came out, then you would have been waiting over 20 years to finally hear Armand's story. In today's video, I'm going to take you all through the entire life of Armand. There is no second follow-up video to this one, guys. This is it. Everything you need to know about him, everything he's been through, his ups and his many downs. This is certainly a video for viewers who really want a gripping story, and I really hope that I do Armand's story justice today. With that being said, please enjoy the life of the Vampire Armand. Welcome back everyone, and thank you for the support. So, I've mentioned in the intro that Armand has a story, and all I can say at the very beginning of this video right now is, wow. Both Armand the man and Armand the vampire have had such a turbulent life, a complicated life, a sad life. For Armand's biggest battle is the one with himself. Even though Lestat takes the spotlight, followed by Louis, for their fame that began with Interview with the Vampire, it can be argued that Armand's story is that of which is to rival the two vampires' famous beginnings. Anyway, let's look at his story and discover what made him the vampire he was in the books. Armand is over 500 years old and is one of the oldest known vampires in existence. He's not the oldest by far, but he's certainly up there. As many of you know, Armand greatly differs in appearance and age when comparing the books to the Interview movie, and I'll get to that momentarily. Actually, just on that note guys, it's not a crime if you've only seen the movies and just want to watch these videos. It's my hope that my videos will encourage you to read the books, and Interview with the Vampire is a great book to begin with. Anyway, moving forward. Armand was born as Andrei in Kiev in 1480. That's right, Armand was not his original name. His father Ivan was actually a great hunter and was widely recognized for it. Andrei's childhood began quite pleasant. He was an incredibly talented painter for someone so young, and he specialized in paintings of religious icons like Jesus Christ, Madonna and the Eastern Orthodox saints. He best described his ability to paint as being in a trance-like state, no second guessing himself. Every line, every stroke he made was final and fluent. His parents reveal his gift to the monks in the monastery of the caves, who live ascetically underground, sustained by only water and small amounts of food. Both the monks and Andrei believe that he is destined to live such a life, while his father is appalled by the idea of having his son live under such strict conditions. Andrei began painting more icons for the monastery, although he would not take credit for anything he painted, as he believed it was God painting through him. He was devoutly religious, he believed in his faith, and knew he was destined to live a life of prayer. His paintings are then noticed by the Kievan ruler Prince Michael, who then instructs Andrei to paint a religious icon for the castle of his supposed dead brother, Prince Fyodor. It's at this point where Andrei's life takes a huge downturn. On his way to delivering the painting, he and his father are attacked by Tartars, with Andrei being kidnapped and separated from his father. The boy is then taken to Constantinople, physically beaten and forced into slavery. He's then sold to a Venetian brothel where he is sexually abused repeatedly for refusing to perform for the brothel's clientele. Armand refused to eat or drink in an effort to end his life as soon as possible. He also describes not remembering what daylight looked like. He was held captive inside for so long. At one point, he's physically beaten so badly that he develops amnesia and forgets large portions of his early life. As Andre's life remained a misery, a 1500-year-old vampire known as Marius de Romanus comes across the brothel and rescues him from his enslavement, purchasing the boy from the brothel's owner. Andre remembers the vampire's hands feeling like wood or brass as he picks him up to take him away. Marius, a painter himself, gives Andre a proper education and rather luxurious lifestyle. Marius renames him Amadeo, as he believes its meaning of beloved of God suits him, despite the boy not being overjoyed at his new name due to the fate he had suffered previously. He dines with Marius every day and even sleeps in his bed every night. He watches the vampire paint, and despite Amadeo still having his artistic talent that he once used so beautifully, he refuses to paint again, although he can't remember fully why. All he can remember is the sickness in his stomach he feels at the thought of holding a brush, possibly still suffering the effects of his amnesia. Amadeo still proves to be an excellent student and even presents several excellent philosophical questions himself during his teachings. Marius also sends him to brothels in order to experience what it was like to couple with people. After discovering the true nature of Marius, Amadeo doesn't view him any differently. It actually intrigues him, and after all, Marius saved his life. He later meets a woman called Bianca, a neighbour of Marius who is quite keen on hosting parties, and also keen on hosting Amadeo in her bed. Despite both Marius and Amadeo sharing several somewhat sensual moments together, they also prefer the company of women, and Bianca in particular was someone with whom Marius was actually in love with. However, it was because of his love for Bianca that he could not change her, as he wanted her to have a full life. Instead, he chooses Amadeo to become an immortal. He has already had the boy educated in many different aspects of human life and spared no expense at it either, but now he will educate him in the way of the blood. Despite making his decision, Marius was still very hesitant to turn Amadeo, as he was still quite young, no older than 17 years of age, not a fully developed human, body or mind. Amadeo justified his master's concerns with his follow-up actions. Frustrated at his master's prolonging of the plans made, Amadeo seduces the English Lord Harlech and spends several days with him before abruptly deciding to abandon him, making it clear to Harlech that he was merely using him. Enraged by the betrayal, Lord Harlech slashes Amadeo's arm with a poisoned blade and mocks him about his impending death. Harlech questions if Amadeo can feel the burn behind his eyes, as that's where the poison hits first, before the Lord dies himself. Bianca cares for Amadeo until Marius arrives. Feeling the boy beginning to slip away, Marius is left with no choice but to give him the dark gift, turning him into a vampire and saving his life. Amadeo recalls his last words to hear as a mortal before being turned, which are as follows: "This is the only sun you will ever see again, but a millennium of nights will be yours to be seen as no mortal has ever seen it." Marius teaches him the ways of being a vampire, and only to hunt evildoers, which Amadeo happily obliges to do so. After some time, Santino, a vampire who had an encounter with Marius in the past and was incredibly able to read his mind despite Marius's age, targeted an attack on Marius and the boys in his Venetian home, along with his satanic coven that he was the leader of. They killed several of the boys Marius rescued, and they burned the house to the ground, horribly burning Marius. They kidnap Amadeo and several of the boys, taking them to Rome. The boys are burned alive in a great fire, but Santino spares Amadeo as he believes he has a heart of God. So begins the second enslavement of the boy. They imprison Amadeo in a cellar and begin starving him until he is ready to comply. They starve him to the point of desperation, and Amadeo reluctantly feeds on children and even one of the boys that was spared. The Coven psychologically torture him for the next 5 months, doing cruel things like showing him the ash of his dead brothers from the home of Marius, before Amadeo, mentally broken, finally admits he is ready to accept the ways of the Satanic Coven. Because of his strength and the rebuilding of his character, he is made the leader of the Parisian Coven. However, due to his name having God in it, Amadeo is no longer a fitting name for what the vampire now represents. He is renamed Armand and leads his coven successfully for the next 200 years, strictly adhering to their code of conduct while worshipping Satan. Despite Santino disappearing for centuries and having no contact with Armand, he and the Parisian Coven would still keep an eye on any unnatural arrivals over the years, with even Magnus, creator of Lestat, an old target for the group. Speaking of Lestat, the vampire arrives in Paris, followed by his mother Gabrielle, and the Coven immediately take notice, watching them from the shadows before eventually trying to capture them both. Lestat the obvious prize. Armand explains the ways of the Coven and scolds Lestat for not upholding the traditional vampire rules they set. The two engage in a battle, and Armand is surprised to discover just how strong Lestat actually is. He overpowers the Coven leader, embarrassing Armand before challenging him and the Coven on these pathetic rules, and goes on to state that no vampire present is fit to live in the current times. He disproves their beliefs that they could not look upon crosses, walk into churches, or live in places of light. Realizing that Lestat is absolutely right about the Coven's obsolescence, Armand falls into despair. Everything he has believed in has been a lie, and he begins destroying most of his own followers. He tries to persuade Lestat to take him along on his journeys, but Lestat refuses. Instead, Gabrielle and Lestat both advise Armand to join the Théâtre des Vampires and learn to adapt to today's times there. Armand eventually becomes the leader of the vampires and begins to participate in their shows. It was he who introduces killing people on stage, fooling the audience into believing it was just high-value production. Armand remained as leader of the Coven until Louis and Claudia arrive in Paris. Santiago first approaches Louis, mimicking his every move, before Armand reveals himself, inviting Louis and Claudia to their production the very next night in the Théâtre des Vampires. Armand was fascinated with Louis' beauty, but more so his character, as Louis had held on to so many parts of his humanity. Armand could see how Louis mourned the loss of one human lifetime, while he had mourned the loss of centuries of lifetimes. He desired him for himself, and the feeling was mutual. Armand wanted Louis no matter the cost. Lestat then arrives at the theatre, looking to speak to Armand. Appearing gaunt, frail, and clearly in a weakened state, he asks Armand for help in seeking revenge against Louis and Claudia. Armand will not help him unless Lestat openly admits in front of everyone that it was Claudia who tried to kill him. That was enough reason for Claudia to be sentenced to death, as it was against the Coven's rules to kill your own kind. Claudia and Madeleine are then turned to ash from the sunlight. However, in the Vampire Armand, we learn Armand's side of the story, his version of the tale. Leading up to her execution, Claudia offers to leave Louis if Armand can give her the body of a woman, no matter how painful the process may be, no matter what it takes. Armand agrees, and in a simply thought out but wild experiment, he decapitates Claudia and tries to place her head on the body of a vampire woman. The experiment failed, and Claudia was now left close to death. Taking a further passage from the book, Armand refuses to divulge the inner details of the botched surgery he tried to perform on Claudia, stating it was so gruesome, so horrific, so undeniably unimaginable that it will be some time before he is able to properly reveal the details of what actually went on in that laboratory. Armand reassembles Claudia's head to her body, stating how he only remembers mostly the big black stitches holding her head upright, and then goes to leave her in the airshaft cell with Madeleine to die. the ash covering any evidence of her surgery. His next step was to rid both him and Louis of Lestat, and he lures Lestat to the top of the tower under false pretenses, drops the facade, and scolds Lestat for destroying everything he had believed in. He easily overpowers him and pushes the already weakened Lestat over the ledge, injuring him so severely that it took 2 full years for Lestat to recover. And you can check out my Lestat video from the link below if you want to find out the extent of Lestat's injuries. Armand then travels with Louis for some time, but realizes that he is forever changed after Claudia's death. The last of what little remained in Louis died with Claudia. Armand also knew that Louis knew Claudia's death could have been prevented if Armand really wanted it so. He does state that Claudia's death will also haunt him forever. Armand and Louis part ways sometime in the 1920s, and he recounts his last memory of Louis' character as their time together concluded. He remained with me because he had to do it. It was the only way he could go on existing, and for death, he has never had the courage and never will. And so he had endured after the loss of Claudia, but in time, he did learn to be alone. Louis, my companion, dried up of his own free will. He became a stranger to himself and to me. For 55 years, Armand, feeling truly alone, tries to get a better understanding of the ways of the modern man. He visited Lestat several times in his house, but one night comes across reporter Daniel Malloy, who was seeking Lestat with the hopes of becoming a vampire, something he had started to become obsessed with achieving after recording the story of Louis for the publication Interview with the Vampire, a title, by the way, Armand was in no means fond of. Together, he and Daniel form a partnership, a companionship of sort, in which Daniel will be Armand's link to the modern world, while Armand will show Daniel the way of the blood when the time to make him a vampire is right. Armand falls in love with Daniel, resulting in the two also becoming lovers. As Daniel's patience to become immortal runs out, Armand becomes more and more hesitant to give him the dark gift because he knows of the effect it will have on their relationship. It's common knowledge amongst older vampires that their fledglings grow to hate their creators as the dark gift becomes unbearable at times. As predicted, Daniel and Armand begin to grow apart and could not stand each other by the events of the Queen of the Damned. Daniel leaves his creator, powerful enough to survive on his own. Just to briefly revisit the Queen of the Damned for a moment, Armand did go to Lestat's concert and was witness to the destruction of Akasha. He travelled to Night Island with Daniel and the others, and it was only afterwards that Daniel actually left him. Anyway, let's move on. Armand joins Lestat in New York City along with David Talbot and Dora and listens to Lestat's story about his encounter with Memnoch the Devil. Lestat goes on to explain his tour of heaven and hell and even brings back Veronica's veil as proof. Armand, religiously revitalized, exposes himself to the sun in an attempt to commit suicide. What some readers actually do forget is that Armand always had strong religious beliefs. As a boy, he painted incredible paintings of religious icons and was set to join the monastery of the caves and live a life of prayer right before he was kidnapped. When he was the leader of the Satanic Coven, he strongly and heavily believed in the Coven's rules and principles until Lestat destroyed them. So although his actions were shocking, trying to commit suicide, I wasn't super surprised that he did what he did, as it was his way of cleansing himself for God and removing an evil being such as himself, a vampire, from the world. He's taken care of by Sibel and Benji as he recovers from his severe injuries, and he is grateful for their help. Armand, however, reads the minds of everyone in the house and discovers that Sibel is actually her brother's captive and has suffered serious physical and emotional abuse under his watch. Benji was also kidnapped by Sibel's brother as a companion and protector for her. Armand then kills Sibel's brother for his crimes, to which she is grateful in return. Armand returns to Marius and finds that Sibel and Benji have now been turned into vampires as a gift from Marius, which Armand is very unhappy about. Regardless, he shows Sibel and Benji unwavering love and later confronts Marius about his actions while they are preoccupied. He claims that Marius changed him as an act of spite because Armand could not be the fledgling Marius wanted him to be. Armand argues that he wanted them to live their full lives, and Marius robbed them of that. However, after a long debate and time to think, Armand accepts what has been done and embraces taking them under his wing. He is also present when Lestat is awakened by Sibel's piano playing. And guys, we will leave it there. Well, we've got to leave it there as that's it. That is the life of Armand, with reference to every book he appears in where he actually has a role to play. Let me know what video you'd like to see next. I'm currently working on a couple of videos, but Lestat is coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you all in the very next video.